Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is mental health. On the conversation around mental health, I want to talk about how we refine our coping mechanisms around stress, especially when it comes to slow burn stress, specifically slow burn panic. And I am someone who is highly sensitive. I'm a highly sensitive person. I think I'd mentioned my Myers-Briggs before, but for the two spectrums, which are E and I, which translate to introversion and extroversion and kind of how you restore your energy, as well as the two NS, I'm straight down the middle for NS, which is visionary and sensing. And the way that that translates for me, like by my own interpretation in my life, is that the more information that I gather on a specific situation, like if that information that I'm gathering is building a picture that I feel ill-equipped to deal with, then it triggers a slow burn panic. And that slow burn panic translates as distress. And with that stress, I've had to learn through the years how to manage some of the, I think, maladaptive behaviors that a lot of us have in place when we're dealing with shock and denial. And when you find yourself in a situation that you feel like you're ill-equipped to deal with, or like you didn't think that you would ever come to face with, then one of the first two things that you're going to experience is shock and denial. And I think that the more information you gather that challenges the denial helps you mitigate against it and like build strategies to face and confront the thing in front of you. But the shock factor can be really debilitating. Like if something is happening in your life and has created a shock, your brain, cognitively speaking, has a lot of different ways to protect you from the magnitude of shock. And one of the ways that the brain can protect you from shock is by trying to minimize or reduce your attention on the effects, the negative effects of that event. And that might make it feel like it's more comforting to you to avoid dealing with those situations, when like the best thing for you to do is like kind of swallow the slow burn panic and take things step by step, bit by bit, and just bite things off with the understanding that you're not going to bite off more than you can chew. And sometimes you find yourself in positions where the position is bigger than what you can address or fix in like one instant. But if you don't progressively move towards resolution in all of the ways that that situation requires, you might find yourself stuck forever. And if you're dealing with maladaptive coping mechanisms, then those coping mechanisms will leave you stuck because you're only ever going to deal with what feels comfortable when you still at some point need to deal with the full thing, right? And so I think that the thing that comes with shock is recognizing like when you're ready to address the things that feel very scary to acknowledge and deal with like the effects of those things. And so I had mentioned in previous videos that I had been a victim of stalking and of intimidation. And I think one of the biggest ways that my body dealt with that, especially when I recognized that I was in imminent danger at one point, and I think that like for me, it was just so beyond my realm of reality. Like I had never considered myself to be the person who would put themselves in a position or to ever meet the kinds of people who would put me in a situation where I would find myself like having to grapple with the fact that like I was actually in danger. Like the stalking was becoming much more violent, much more insidious, and if I wasn't careful, like it could end in a really bad way. And I think that I was so focused on the core essence of survival at that point in time, like just how to stay a couple of steps ahead. Some of the other things that were impacted by that event in my life, like I just couldn't pay attention to. And now, like, you know, I'm realizing like there are things that I dropped that like for the point in time, like I had every right and reason to drop those things. Those are things that I could not focus on if my focus was on surviving long term. But like at some point you need to pick those things back up. And it's hard to pick those things back up if you've given yourself permission to develop, I think, not necessarily the best coping mechanisms, dealing with shock and dealing with denial of what it is that you encountered. But at some point you want to confront those things. And so here are some of the strategies that I leverage when it is the case that I'm trying to bounce back from a situation or any event that's creating the slow burn panic, making me feel like, hey, this is something that I find is going to be like easy or straightforward to address. And so one of the things that I think is really important is showing yourself compassion. I think we can't control the events that take place in our lives. And one of the hardest things for me to, I think, do for myself is to exercise compassion for the ways that I dealt with it, because I didn't really know what I was doing. I was doing the best that I could, and I was very scared for the most part of it, right? And I think that a lot of the times when we think about survival scenarios, when we think about like escape rooms and like these what if scenarios, what we don't really factor a whole lot for is the emotional impact that those situations are going to create in us. Like if you're in a high stress situation where your emotions are all over the place and your focus is on survival, it's going to impact the way that you think critically about how you navigate that terrain. And while I'm like very happy with like the outcome with how I dealt with things generally speaking, I mean, a few balls got dropped, right? Like there are a few things that I typically would be very good at taking care of that I couldn't take care of. And now it's like, okay, well, I need to deal with the ramifications of that. And there's this one saying that I've heard, and it's been actually a very comforting saying that like, if you find that you've gone in the wrong direction, the moment that you figure out you've gone in the wrong direction, you get off at that. Like, let's say you've taken a train. Like if you find that you've gotten on a train and you've taken the train to the wrong direction, the longer that you stay on the train after realizing that you're going in the wrong direction, like the more costly it's going to cost to go back, but you still have to go back at some point. And I think that like I've reached this stage where I'm emotionally ready. Like I feel the groundedness, I feel centered enough to get off the train and to, regardless how expensive it is. And I think that I have come to terms with the fact that there are certain decisions that I've made, like the costs associated with those decisions that I've made, translates as me having survived those situations. Like that's kind of how I look at it. And that's me showing myself grace. But now it's like, okay, well, I can't allow myself to continuously incur costs because of surviving that situation. Like I need to find a way to bounce back from it and to be resilient and to not like feel like that situation is looming over my head for like the rest of my life. I don't want to feel that way. But it is a lot of like peeling back different layers of, I think, trauma and of shock, of denial. There's a lot of emotional layers that play into some of the pragmatic steps that I need to take to get back from that. And so that's why I want to talk about like the first thing that I really needed to do to even confront all of those layers and deal with like the massive amount of emotions that those situations created, was just being very compassionate with myself about it, because like I was not equipped. Like I had not been prepared in my life to deal with that kind of violence at all. I did not know what I was doing for the most part. Like I was running scared. And I don't know if any of you have seen that movie, because sometimes I feel like things are like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I watched that movie Running Scared with Paul Walker, and it was like such an amazing movie. But like you would think to myself, like, how much belief do I need to suspend to really step into this movie? And then you realize there are people who are living like that in their lives. Like there are people who have confronted like bad people with bad intentions, and they are literally running scared. And at one point, like I was running scared, and I just remembered in that moment, like I remember like at the worst part of it, I would remember thinking about this movie Running Scared and thinking to myself, how could I have allowed myself to be so skeptical that this be someone's experience? Like how could I be so far removed from the reality that so many people experience on a day-to-day basis? Because I think that like stability in people's lives, like dealing with like a life that doesn't have threats, I think that's like a minority of us. But I don't think that we talk about it enough to know like how prevalent it is that people are dealing with violence, any kind of violence, whether that's domestic violence, whether that's stalking, threatening, intimidating. Like that is happening much more frequently than we know. And I know that we don't know how frequently it's happening, because while it was happening to me, like the one thing that I could not do was be very open about it. I was too afraid to be open about it. And I think a lot of people are too afraid to be open about the violence that they experience. And then that is then coupled by the shock, by the denial, by all of the levels of guilt and shame that creates a bit of a perfect storm that you're trying to manage internally. But I think that you still can manage it. But the first step is compassion. Like you have to be compassionate with yourself for how you managed it, for how you managed it poorly, for how you will give yourself the opportunity to manage it better moving forward. But compassion is a big, big step. The second one is recognizing that what feels good is very different from what is good. And a lot of the coping mechanisms that I was, I guess, balancing across were things that were self-preserving by way of like giving myself something else to focus on. Like sometimes in the worst of it, like when I felt so overwhelmed with like all of the things that were taking place, like I just needed to take a break and just do yoga. Like I would literally like shut the world out and would do yoga. But then I found that that wasn't the only time I would shut the world out. Like there would be times where I would go down like a certain rabbit hole of thoughts, and it would just feel like, hey, like if I really allow myself to look at all of the things that kind of went awry, it feels like it's too much. And then what I would do is I would like shut that door and just not think about it. But then I wouldn't address the things in my very real life that needed to be addressed to be able to mitigate against those things and to be able to handle that. And so like lately, I'm like, I need to hold myself accountable to like the promises and the commitments that I've made to myself to like fix things. Like, and it's not my fault that things were broken. Like I didn't ask for the events that took place to have taken place, but it is my responsibility ability to bounce back, to be resilient, to make sure that that's not a situation that defines me long term. But for that to happen, I needed to confront the very big emotions that I was spending a lot of my time avoiding because I wasn't ready yet to really deal with the full magnitude of what it was that I had experienced. And I think that a lot of the times we think about survival and we think that people who share their survival stories are like these, I guess, like Hercules type individuals. But a lot of the times, like, you don't even know how you survived it, right? And a lot of the time. And when I think about the things that I've survived, like, I don't know how I got through those things, right? Because there's just a lot of trauma, like, I think, obscuring my vision of things. And now in hindsight, now that I'm giving myself the opportunity to really think about the things that I have lived through, there's just so much awe. There's so much awe with what I was able to accomplish, with the things that I was able to do, with the steps that I took, and with the ways that I was able to preserve and protect myself, not just in that moment, because I was thinking long term. Like, I did not, like, a lot of the questions that I asked myself in those moments was, I need to make sure that I make the kinds of choices so that like the version of me 10 years from now, 15 years from now, 20 years from now, because I plan on living through the situation, that person's not dealing with a lot of chaos, with a lot of wreckage, right? There's already wreckage happening around me. I need my choices to be very much about alignment and integrity, because it's just, even if that adds to the chaos that I'm living in right now, like, I can't let this chaos allow me to compromise on my values and my beliefs. And I'm so happy that that was one of the key indicators for me of like what success looked like when I was trying to deal with every specific like roadblock, obstacle, hurdle. But then, like, in hindsight, like when I think about like just the magnitude of what I was dealing with, like not feeling equipped to deal with it at all, like I had to give myself kudos for the way that I dealt with it then. But now, like, now that I'm a few steps removed from that, like I can step in, use my logical brain and be like, okay, well, now the wreckage that I was comfortable or had to be comfortable dealing with or like allowing take place in my life, like I need to clean that up now. So I think knowing that you are strong enough to fix the things that that situation broke in your life, to deal with the wreckage, to deal with the ruin that it created. And I think like every beginning starts with an ending, right? And I think the endings are formally when we recognize like that part of our life is over. It doesn't need to live rent free in our brain, like going over and over again with us feeling crippled to deal with it. Like at some point you need to look at the situation and be like, well, I'm not crippled to deal with this. I can deal with this step by step. I can take off manageable bites, and at some point it will get better, right? And you have to just trust that at some point, like if you take manageable bites out of the situation, progressively dealing with it the way that it needs to be dealt with, like things will get better. And so that is how I've also dealt with slow burn panic. And the third way that I dealt with slow burn panic is just acknowledgement as well. And this all seemed very easy. Like it's like it seems like straightforward tips, but they're not, because I think when you're dealing with big emotions, especially visceral emotions, because of really, I think, outlier situations. And I think when I think about outlier situations, there's situations where you're not going to find a whole heck of a lot of people that you can relate to about it. And I think about, there was this one TikTok that I had watched, and it was like this woman talking about like how to survive different extenuating situations. And the way that she wanted to, I guess, establish her credibility was she was talking about how she had been in prison for 10 years. And as a result of that, like she knows how bad people think. And if you're like at gunpoint, like if someone has you at gunpoint and tells you to go to a second location, like it's better to do something else. It is better to like never go to that second location. And she's like, I know this because I've been around people like who would be the ones who would bring you to the second location and things are not going to be good there. And I think to myself, like, who would have open conversations about like the way that they would harm people like that? Like, I don't believe that, right? Like, I don't think that someone who is that evil, like would like be open and candid about like what they would do to people if they've already been caught for it. I just don't think that. But in all cases, like this is me digressing. I think that it's really important that you recognize that if your focus is on survival, and if your focus is on not just surviving that moment, but living with a certain degree of personal pride and how you dealt with it, still maintaining alignment to your sense of integrity and your values, then I think that when all is said and done, like as you deal with picking up the pieces from that situation, like you need to be very compassionate with yourself. You need to show yourself grace. You need to recognize that survival brain does not work the same way. Like when you're focused on self-preservation, like you're not functioning the same way as you would if you're dealing with regular life, right? Like where, you know, your emotions are not very triggered. You're not very stressed out. You're not dealing with a slow burn panic because the big picture paints a very ugly picture. And that's like very logically speaking, it's like the more that I would think about like the factors that were coming into play, the more that I was like I have to really be cognizant that like if I'm not very careful and intentional about every step that I make, like my chances of survival here are not great, right? And I hope that that's not something that anyone ever has to deal with. But if it is the case that you do have to deal with it, like I think alignment is so important, integrity is so important. And then when you live through that, rather than have guilt and shame for having been victimized by that situation, like give yourself compassion, show yourself grace, give yourself the opportunity to deal with the shock that maybe you avoided. And I think sometimes the self-preservation tactic, like what your brain does without asking permission to do, is avoid specific situations that trigger very bad memories, even if the situation now is something that you can deal with without the bad memories. Like there's no real association to them. It's just that they are linked together in your memory. But I think that it's important that you look at it long enough to dissociate that link so that you can deal with the wreckage that that situation created without feeling like you're re-traumatizing yourself in a way. And so that's what I wanted to come on here and say. I want to talk a little bit about how critical thinking can be layered back into those phases and stages in your life that were very daunting, that were very stressful, that were very difficult to deal with, and then how you can leverage critical thinking to walk you through those big emotions that you went through and give you the opportunity to find closure, to find peace with how you dealt with the situation. Because again, hindsight is 2020. All of us would have done things differently. All of us would have done things better in hindsight. You don't have that hindsight bias when you're going through like a very high intensity, high emotions, high stakes situation. You're just kind of doing the best that you can with the information that you have. And so that's what I did, and that's how I dealt with it. And so now it's really about dealing with some of the ways of shock and denial. Like, did I really go through that? Like, was it really like, it was actually like significantly worse than what I gave myself the ability to acknowledge at that point in time. Like I think like even the way that I was looking at it, like when I was going through that rabbit hole where I was building a big picture out of the little pieces of information that I was pulling, I think to some extent even my brain like wanted me to feel like it was not as significant as I was. And now in hindsight, when I look back, I'm like, no, like it was a really big deal. Like I survived a really big thing, and it's something that I need to talk about more frequently because I don't think that I'm an outlier and that I've survived something so radical, right? And I think that a lot of people have survived radical things but don't know how to be beyond the victim of that situation. Like how do you then now look at that situation, look at all of the things that were caused and created by that situation and fix it? Because again, like we're not responsible for the things that happen in our lives that are beyond our realm of control, but it is our responsibility to fix it. And so that's a daily choice that I make that I am working towards fully addressing on a day-to-day basis. I can't say that I'm completely there, but today I felt like I had a bit of a breakthrough moment where I'm like, you know what, like I am able to look at this full situation and dissociate the links that were created because of the emotional charge of that situation. Like I read the links between specific things that typically wouldn't be linked, but anytime I would think about a specific thing, it would trigger a lot of the fear and a lot of the terror that I had experienced at the time. So I just didn't think about a specific thing. But now I'm like, no, I can think about that thing so I can figure out a way to address it without allowing myself to feel like re-traumatized by the memories associated with it. And that just comes with time, right? And it took me time to get here, to be honest. But again, that analogy is so important. Like when you are at a train station and you get on the train, you go in the wrong direction. Like the moment that you realize, it's more than the moment that you realize, because I think I knew for a while that like I'm not going in the right direction. Like this is not the direction I want to take. But when you're ready to stop and to get off the train and to go back, like whatever the cost, you get off the train, you pay the cost to go back, and you take it as a lesson learned. It doesn't define you by any means, but being able to take your power back, that is a defining moment. And that is something worth celebrating for all of you who are dealing with life events that have brought you to a turning point where you're like, well, what things do I need to do? How do I address the issues in my life that were created or caused by these specific traumatic events that give me the opportunity to take my power back so that I do just that and take my power back? So that's what I wanted to come in here and talk about. Some food for thought for you, food for thought for me as well, because I wanted to spend the entire month of June talking about the juxtaposition between critical thinking and mental health and wellness and education. And I think that talking a little bit about trauma and how that plays into critical thinking, because it can skew our critical thinking just a little bit in the moment. But when we have some distance, we can recall our power back. We can address things differently. We can figure out a way to repair. And I want to come here and talk about that and share that good news use message with you because it's definitely a good use message for me. And for a while, like I wasn't thinking about repair, I was just thinking about all of the wreckage, and it was just so overwhelming that I just had to think about something else. And now I'm like, no, like I can tell my thoughts, like how to address those big things that feel daunting so that I can make the types of choices that are going to serve me long term and not hurt me. And if you want to learn more about how to make the types of choices that will serve you and not hurt you, and how to focus on cultivating that sense of self-mastery to be able to create fulfillment and meaning in your life and move away from feeling helpless and feeling victimized by life, because sometimes, I mean, we can feel that way, then I do invite you to take a look at our website. We do offer adult programs that give you the opportunity to create the life skills to do exactly that. And we also believe that leadership doesn't start too young. Leadership is a competency that starts at home. And so from home, your home, we do have online, virtual, digital, continuous workshops that give you the opportunity to cultivate that critical thinking and that intellectual curiosity at home. And we think that leadership competency is built on 4 core pillars, and that's focusing on self-concept, autonomy, self-efficacy, and compassion as the grounding foundation of leadership in your child, giving your children the opportunity to cultivate perseverance and resilience for an increasingly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. And I think the skills that we need to learn are more about life skills and less about like hard skills, because we have AI, robotics, technology that can do the hard skills, but the life skills, that's unparalleled. Those are the things that we definitely want to equip ourselves with, equip our children with, and we definitely have something for everyone. And I mean, we thank you in advance, like, you know, for listening to this video, for following us, for giving us the opportunity to play a small role in your journey. Thank you so much again for listening. Hopefully this was helpful. If there was a way that you yourself had to kind of like face yourself and be like, listen, like this happened, I get it, but for me to bounce back from this, like this is what recovery looks like, this is what fixing things looks like, this is how I reclaim my power, I would love to hear your story in the comments. I will address every story that I hear in the comments. And yeah, I think that's one thing that we all have in common. We might not have a common story, but we all have an event or an experience or someone that we had met in our lives that really created a lot of chaos and destruction, but that doesn't need to define us ever. So thank you again for listening, and I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.